This video is for informational and educational purposes only. All information presented is based on publicly available sources, including news reports and public records. The individuals mentioned are referenced solely in the context of reporting factual events. Any images or video clips used are stock footage and are intended for illustrative purposes only. The people shown in this video have no connection to the actual events or individuals discussed. No harm, defamation, or misrepresentation is intended. Viewer discretion is advised due to sensitive and potentially disturbing content. The engine hummed low, barely audible over the distant roar of interstate traffic. Beneath the fluorescent glow of a Nashville truck stop, a lifeless body lay sprawled behind a dumpster. Sarah Hulbert, a 25-year-old woman with dreams of escaping a troubled life, had met a violent end. Her lifeless eyes stared at the darkened sky, and a single gunshot wound told a chilling story. But what was even more terrifying was the realization that this wasn't an isolated crime. It was the work of a predator, one who roamed the highways, hiding in plain sight. Bruce Mendenhall maneuvered his semi-truck down a long stretch of highway, the diesel engine's hum filling the cab. The flickering streetlights illuminated the road, but his focus never wavered. To others, Bruce seemed like any trucker on a solitary haul, but beneath his calm exterior lay a sinister secret. Bruce was a master at blending in. In Albion, Illinois, he was the quiet father at church, the hardworking man neighbors nodded to. His wife, Linda, thought she'd married a simple, dedicated husband, unaware of the dark double life he led or the thoughts that consumed him on the road. Truck stops were his hunting grounds, places where strangers came and went, leaving little trace. Bruce had studied their rhythms: hitchhikers, sex workers, drifters. He could spot the vulnerable, the ones no one would miss. And he knew how to wait. His descent began with persistent thoughts that grew in the solitude of his job. On a rainy night in 2005 at an Indiana truck stop, Bruce crossed an unthinkable line. That night's horrors haunted victims' families, but for Bruce, it was only the start. Back home, the Mendenhall family was oblivious. Linda, worn from work, fell asleep to the TV, never questioning Bruce's delays. His daughters texted him about school, his son asked to borrow the truck. Bruce's calm responses hid the truth. The open road became his playground, a way to vanish into America's vast highways with his secrets. His job was the perfect alibi, a man always on the move, leaving no trail. But as he stopped in Tennessee, the cracks in his carefully built facade began to show. The Truck Stops of America facility in Nashville, Tennessee buzzed with activity. Diesel fumes blended with the smell of diner food as trucks rumbled in and out. Bruce parked his semi in his usual corner, away from the lights and attention. Stepping out into the humid summer night, he scanned the area and saw her, a young woman no older than 25 standing near the diner entrance. Her fidgeting hands, nervous glances, and forced smile betrayed her desperation. She approached a group of truckers but was brushed off, retreating to the vending machines. Bruce watched, calculating. He recognized her type, desperate, down on her luck, and easy to manipulate. He approached with a practiced tone. "You okay, miss?" he asked calmly. She hesitated but answered quietly, "Yeah, just waiting for someone." Bruce nodded, feigning belief. "If you need a ride, I'm heading toward Atlanta, no pressure." Her eyes flicked to his truck before she softly declined. Bruce smiled and returned to his truck, keeping her in sight. Patience was his weapon. He knew she'd come around. Hours later, as the truck stop quieted, she knocked on his door. Bruce opened it with mock surprise. "Changed your mind?" She nodded, clutching a small backpack. He helped her into the cab, offering her water and a warm smile. But as the door shut, the atmosphere shifted. The predator in Bruce awakened, and the cab felt suffocating. The young woman would never reach her destination. Bruce? He would drive on, his dark secrets buried in the endless highway. But his time was running out. Authorities were closing in, connecting the dots he thought were scattered. When they caught him, Bruce's truck would tell a story far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. June 26, 2007. The morning air was thick with humidity as the sun rose over Nashville, Tennessee. At the Truck Stops of America facility, truckers came and went, fueling up and grabbing coffee for another day on the road. Amid the routine bustle, an employee took the familiar walk toward the dumpsters to dispose of the previous night's trash. But this morning was different. The employee froze mid-step. Someone, was lying behind the dumpsters. At first glance it seemed like a person sleeping off a rough night, but as the employee stepped closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was a woman, motionless, pale, her body sprawled awkwardly on the pavement. The lifeless eyes of Sarah Hulbert stared into nothingness, her body riddled with signs of violence. A single gunshot wound pierced her chest, an unmistakable sign of murder. Panic set in. The employee's trembling hands fumbled for a phone to call 911. Within minutes, the area was swarmed with police cars, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the area as Detective Sergeant Pat Postiglione arrived. Known for his meticulous nature and unrelenting determination, Postiglione took one look at the scene and knew this was no random act of violence. Detective Postiglione scanned the scene, piecing together the story Sarah Hulbert's body told: bruises, blood spatter, and the angle of her fall. But critical answers were missing. Nearby, he believed, lay the key to solving the mystery. While the forensic team worked, Postiglione reviewed surveillance footage from the truck stop. Hours of trucks coming and going revealed little until 11:30 p.m., when a semi-truck parked near the dumpsters. A man exited, vanished from view for minutes, then returned and drove off. Though blurry, the footage offered a crucial lead. Postiglione issued an alert describing the truck in detail. Weeks passed without progress, but Postiglione persisted, poring over databases, logs, and interviewing witnesses. Finally, a breakthrough. The same truck reappeared at the truck stop where Sarah's body was found. Its driver, Bruce Mendenhall, seemed calm and ordinary to most, but Postiglione's instincts flagged him as suspicious. When Mendenhall allowed a search of his truck, the evidence painted a horrifying picture: blood-stained clothing, latex gloves, a .22 caliber firearm, and, most chillingly, DNA linking Sarah and other women to the truck. The surveillance footage had uncovered a predator. As Mendenhall was arrested, Postiglione realized this was just the start. A trail of death stretched far beyond Nashville. Sarah Hulbert's tragic end marked the beginning of a horrifying pattern as investigators uncovered Bruce Mendenhall's crimes. Each victim's story reflected lives stolen by a predator who saw them as disposable. Samantha Winters, 48, was last seen at a truck stop in Lebanon, Tennessee. Her body, discarded in a trash can, symbolized the violence she endured. Struggling financially, she crossed paths with Mendenhall while seeking work at truck stops. Karma Purpura, a 31-year-old mother of two, disappeared from a truck stop in Indianapolis. Her remains were discovered years later along a highway in Kentucky, leaving her family devastated by the prolonged uncertainty and brutal reality of her fate. Lucille Greta Carter was found in a trash bin in Birmingham, Alabama, suffocated with a plastic bag taped around her head and evidence of a gunshot wound. Her death, like the others, revealed the calculated cruelty of her killer. Deborah Ann Glover, a sex worker in Atlanta, was murdered near a Motel 6. Found in a desolate area, her body bore violent injuries, and investigators tied her death to Mendenhall's movements. Sarah, Samantha, Karma, Lucille, Deborah, and others shared common vulnerabilities, living on society's margins and falling prey to a man who thrived on their invisibility. Truck stops became his hunting grounds, places where he could operate unnoticed. The mounting evidence painted Mendenhall as a predator who exploited transient life, leaving families shattered and communities searching for answers. While his arrest brought some closure, the pain endured, and the full scope of his crimes remained a haunting mystery.
Negative, K. Nothing further. Just see the cabbie in the corner.
The arrest of Bruce Mendenhall was only the start of uncovering a nightmare far worse than investigators imagined. It began with the items found in his truck, blood-stained clothing sent to the lab for DNA testing, which revealed the identities of women whose lives had ended so tragically. Sarah Hulbert's DNA was the first confirmed match, but the lab soon discovered the blood of other women yet to be linked to Mendenhall. Detectives cross-referenced his trucking logs with reports of missing persons and unsolved homicides across multiple states. His routes painted a chilling picture. Truck stops and rest areas where women had vanished without a trace formed a grim pattern. In one case, investigators linked him to the murder of Samantha Winters, whose body was found in a trash can at a Lebanon, Tennessee truck stop. In another, his travel logs matched the disappearance of Karma Purpura, a mother whose remains were found along a Kentucky highway years later. Both women's blood was found in his truck, sealing his connection to their deaths. Lucille Carter's case in Birmingham, Alabama was similarly tied to him. Her body was found with a plastic bag taped over her head, and witnesses later recalled seeing a truck like Mendenhall's parked nearby. These discoveries illuminated how his ability to blend into the transient trucking world enabled his crimes to go unnoticed for years. The most chilling discovery came with his confessions, though inconsistent and vague. When questioned, Mendenhall admitted there might be more, but refused to elaborate, leaving detectives to speculate about how many lives he had destroyed. Each clue, from bloody clothing to his travel logs, brought investigators closer to the unthinkable truth. For detectives, solving these crimes wasn't just about connecting the dots, it was about giving a voice to the victims who could no longer speak. Cold cases, once forgotten, were finally being pieced together, and justice for those silenced lives became the ultimate goal. The rain pounded against the windshield as Bruce Mendenhall sat in his idling semi-truck, his knuckles tight on the wheel. Outside, the flickering neon lights of the truck stop cast eerie shadows, but the real darkness lurked within him. Bruce wasn't just a truck driver, he was a predator, driven by an insatiable need for control. It hadn't started this way. He once lived an ordinary life, driving endless miles to deliver goods across the country. But isolation gnawed at him. Rejection, failure, and bitterness filled his days. That bitterness eventually grew into rage, simmering beneath his otherwise mundane routine. The first victim wasn't planned, or so Bruce told himself. She was a woman at a truck stop, her smile bright but weary. Something about her presence triggered him. A fleeting moment of tension gave way to an impulsive act of violence, and in that act, Bruce felt something unexpected: power. From then on, the truck stops became his hunting grounds. Lonely parking lots, dimly lit rest areas, and the transient souls who drifted through them became his perfect targets. He told himself they were easy to forget, women on the margins, unnoticed by society. But he didn't just kill, he hunted. The thrill of stalking his victims became as addictive as the act itself. Yet his crimes were reckless. He left behind trails, a receipt, a fingerprint, but the vast highways cloaked him in anonymity. Victims disappeared into the shadows of cold cases, and Bruce thrived in the silence. But as the body count grew, so did his need for recognition. Taunting clues led investigators closer, until the day Bruce made a fatal mistake. He was caught at another truck stop, a fitting end to his reign of terror. Even in custody, Bruce showed no remorse. The man once consumed by rejection now clung to his power. And as the rain fell on his cab that final night, one truth became clear. The road he chose had always led here, straight into the darkness. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, thick with the weight of justice. Every seat was filled, faces in the gallery a mix of somber determination and anger. Bruce Mendenhall, clad in a drab prison uniform, sat eerily calm at the defense table, seemingly indifferent to the gravity of the moment. The prosecution wasted no time painting a vivid picture of Sarah Hulbert's final moments, her life cruelly taken where she sought temporary safety. Forensic reports struck like a hammer, tire tracks matching Mendenhall's truck, DNA evidence, and witnesses placing him at the scene. The jury leaned forward, captivated, as the prosecutor presented the crown jewel, a chilling confession in Mendenhall's own words, delivered with the cold precision of a man devoid of remorse. The defense struggled to mount a meaningful counter-argument claiming inconsistencies in the investigation, but the tide of evidence was overwhelming. In the gallery, victims' families sat stone-faced, their grief palpable. For Sarah Hulbert's loved ones, this trial was about more than justice. It was about closure, ensuring the man who stole their daughter, sister, and friend would never harm another. Finally, the jury returned, their expressions unreadable. "Guilty," the foreman declared, his voice slicing through the silence. Mendenhall remained motionless while Sarah's family dissolved into tears. The judge handed down the sentence: life in prison without parole. As the courtroom emptied, whispers lingered. This was more than a trial. It was a reckoning. Justice had been served, but the scars of Mendenhall's crimes would resonate for years to come. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and murmurs of anticipation. Nearly a decade had passed since Bruce Mendenhall first faced justice, but the shadow of his crimes still loomed. This trial was for the murder of Samantha Winters, another life stolen by the predator who once roamed as an unremarkable truck driver. The prosecution presented DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and links to Mendenhall's truck, painting a horrifying picture of calculated violence. Family members sat in quiet pain, clutching photos of Samantha, reminders of the life stolen too soon. When the guilty verdict was read, tears and cries filled the room, as another life sentence ensured Mendenhall would never see freedom. But the horror wasn't over. Investigators soon brought charges for Karma Purpura's murder, adding another victim to the grim ledger. Each trial forced families to relive their grief, reopening wounds but bringing them closer to closure. Mendenhall's silence left many unanswered questions, fueling speculation about how many more lives he had taken. As the gavel fell for the final time, multiple life sentences ensured no further victims, but the scars of his actions would never truly fade. His crimes left a shadow that would haunt the lives of those he had shattered forever. The truth about Bruce Mendenhall's crimes lies buried in a web of unanswered questions, a twisted puzzle scattered across America's highways. Despite his convictions, the haunting question remained: how many women had he really killed? Authorities confirmed 6 victims, but whispers suggested many more, perhaps double or triple. Truck stops, transient havens for travelers, became silent witnesses to his crimes, each a potential scene of horror. Investigators pored over cold case files and mapped Mendenhall's trucking routes, uncovering haunting patterns, remote parking lots, lonely highways, and missing women. But gaps in the timeline loomed, swallowing the full truth. Mendenhall offered no answers. Silent during interrogations, he occasionally taunted investigators with cryptic remarks. "There's more to this story," he once said, smirking, "but you'll never know it all." For families of the missing, his silence was agonizing, leaving them clinging to fading photos and unanswered questions. Authorities scoured desolate roads using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search for remains. Sometimes they found only empty soil, other times fragments of lives tragically cut short. Truck stops themselves became symbols of fear, as patrons recalled fleeting, unsettling encounters with Mendenhall. Unanswered questions tormented families and investigators alike. How many lives had slipped through the cracks? How many victims had vanished due to missed opportunities to stop him? These haunting mysteries ensured Mendenhall's crimes became a macabre legend, his name whispered in law enforcement circles as the monster they caught but never fully understood. For grieving families, hope flickered faintly despite Mendenhall's silence. They clung to the belief that one day, the full truth would emerge, but for now, the weight of unanswered questions kept his dark legacy alive. haunting those he left behind. The courtroom was silent, except for the shuffle of papers. Families of Bruce Mendenhall's victims sat together, their grief raw yet resilient. Tear-streaked faces and hollow eyes told of lives shattered, but determination shone beneath the sorrow. Sarah Hulbert's mother, her voice cracking, described a daughter full of laughter, her life stolen too soon. Facing Mendenhall, she said, "You didn't just take her, you took the light from our lives." Her words echoed the collective pain in the room. Karma Purpura's sister turned grief into advocacy, organizing vigils and sharing her sister's story. "If we don't talk about them, they disappear all over again," she said with resolve. Samantha Winter's father spoke of his daughter's haunting smile and how truck stops now felt like graveyards. His wife clutched a photo, holding it as if it could bring her back. The family's anguish fueled action. They demanded safer truck stops, stronger protections, and better law enforcement coordination, striving to show their loved ones were more than statistics. Still, the past haunted them. A mother admitted truck stops now triggered breakdowns. Once safe spaces turned into painful reminders. Their fight extended beyond Mendenhall to the systems that enabled predators like him. Their voices reached beyond the courtroom. They lobbied for reforms, created support groups, and turned grief into a force for change, ensuring their loved ones' memories endured and their pain fueled resilience against Mendenhall's crimes. The cell door slammed shut, locking Bruce Mendenhall into a world beyond his control. Inside the cold, unforgiving walls, the man who once prowled truck stops now found himself caged like an animal. At first, Mendenhall was an enigma. Guards observed him closely, expecting violent outbursts from a man whose crimes had shocked the nation. Yet they found a man eerily composed, void of emotion, his detachment unsettling. To many, he seemed more like a hollow shell than a human being. Prison life was not kind to Mendenhall. News of his crimes had spread, and inmates who abided by their own codes of honor viewed his targeting of vulnerable women as unforgivable. The first attack came during a meal service, with a tray slammed into the back of his head. Over time, the hostility became more deliberate, a shove, a hidden shiv. But Mendenhall remained calm, almost resigned to his fate. His stoic demeanor unnerved both guards and inmates alike. While others displayed flickers of fear or regret, Mendenhall's unchanging detached mask only deepened his infamy. Some wondered if he thrived on the unease he inspired, even within the prison's hostile environment. Late at night, cracks in his facade emerged. He was seen pacing his cell, whispering as if haunted by his own past. Whether this was remorse, regret, or a twisted replay of his crimes remained a mystery. For the families of his victims, knowing Mendenhall was behind bars offered bitter solace. Some visited the prison to glimpse the man who had destroyed their lives but left with no answers, only the haunting image of a man devoid of humanity. In the end, Mendenhall was more than a prisoner. He was a grim reminder of the darkness humanity could harbor. Even in his cell, his legacy continued to haunt, leaving the question, was justice enough, or did his crimes still hold power to shadow the living? The world of truck stops and highways still bore the scars of Bruce Mendenhall's dark legacy. For those who crossed his path, the memories lingered like an unrelenting storm. His story wasn't just about the brutality of his crimes. It forced a deeper question: how does someone descend so far into darkness, unnoticed by the world around them? Mendenhall's history was one of small cracks, personal failures, isolation, and unchecked rage that festered over time. He masked his unraveling behind the routine of the trucking industry, blending into the landscape while his mental health deteriorated. His crimes raised uncomfortable truths about the dangers of untreated emotional wounds, particularly in solitary professions. Even in custody, Mendenhall remained an enigma. His silence during investigations and cold detachment in courtrooms left a void for the families of his victims, a wound that refused to heal. When another conviction came years later, it brought a small sense of justice but also reignited the pain for grieving families, emphasizing the sheer damage one man could inflict. Bruce Mendenhall's shadow stretched far beyond prison walls. His story wasn't just about the victims or the justice system, it reflected society's failure to recognize warning signs in people like him. The highways remained haunted by his actions, but with every mile traveled, there was hope that lessons learned from his reign of terror might prevent another like him from emerging. His legacy was a warning, and the resilience of those who fought for justice stood as a faint yet enduring beacon.